Good evening, Abrar. So I have with me Abrar Anwar. So just to give a brief introduction, I have worked in Bangladesh from 2010 to 2011, around June July, uh, and June July, and I worked for a newspaper called the Independent, which interestingly was owned by the Beximco group, which was the owner of the group was a part of the last Awami. Mr. Salman F Rahman was the part of the Awami League government, which was toppled a few days back, and which we're all aware. So with Abrar, I would I like to understand how things have changed in last one decade for Bangladesh. There was a point where Bangladesh GDP was even doing very great, and there was a lot of news that the currency value was going very high even compared to the Indian rupee. But all that came crashing some months back. The Bangladeshi again, the Taka value came down. So all these, even there was a point where a lot of news was there that there's reverse migration happening in Bangladesh. People were coming back to Bangladesh because more employment was there. So having employment is one thing, having good roads and bridges and metro rail connection is one thing, but human right abuse is another thing. Not feeling not feeling not having the freedom to speak your mind is one thing. So I feel somewhere on one side, if Bangladesh was doing very good on certain fronts, it was really going down. So that is where I felt as an outsider, things changed. Things changed. So I would like to now request Mr. Abrar to introduce himself, and then perhaps talk about how things started changing. And I will keep intervening here and there where when I would need to ask some question. So Abrar had just finished school when I left. So from there, and now Mr. Abrar owns two IT companies, one based out of one registered in the US and one in Dubai, and they work in the healthcare sector as well, uh, providing tech support to certain patients who suffer from certain who suffer. I'd ask Mr. Abrar only to shed light on that. So Abrar, if you could just introduce yourself and then start.
Sure, Sarwar. Thank you so much for this opportunity in this call. I'm Abrar Anwar. I'm 32. Uh, I'm a father and a software engineer working based out of Bangladesh. I started my career as a journalist, Sarwar, as you know, with you at The Independent when I was 18 years old, just graduating high school. Uh, I worked at a couple of newspapers since Daily Sun and then Dhaka Tribune. After ending my career as a journalist, I moved on to be a software developer. Right now, I own a company. Well, I have shares in a company that is developing technology for individuals with neurodivergence. Its name is Ohana, and the company is based out of Delaware. So we make technology for individuals with autism, Down syndrome, and the like. Um, I've been a fairly interesting case because I was born in the States and I came back to Bangladesh when I was 2. And my education has been back and forth between the two countries, but I consider myself proudly, very distinctly Bangladeshi in my culture, in my upbringing, in my mannerisms, in the way that I define my life and my career. 99% of it all has happened here in Bangladesh, right? Uh, Sarwar, when you left, you specified that time period of 2010-11, which was near the beginnings of this regime of Awami League. Um, Previous to your coming to Bangladesh, there was the BNP Jamaat alliance. Jamaat being the highly militant, extremist kind of uh, political party here.
I mean, in Bangladesh, I mean it's considered the far right party. Like the
Exactly.
far right definition keeps changing from country to country. So in Bangladesh, that's the far right party you have.
Right. And BNP Jamaat near the end of their regime was not a popular regime at the time. Um, However, that doesn't um, excuse the way the Awami League government came into power. I'm not sure if you know, but just before you're coming to Bangladesh, there was a major military level coup. We refer to as the Pilkhana incident, where multiple members, high ranking members of Border Guard Bangladesh and the Bangladesh military who opposed Sheikh Hasina were brutally attacked and murdered within the premises of the Border Guard.
I
Uh,
remember. I mean, I remember reading it on news, and also interestingly, this happened next to the place we used to live in Dhanmondi. I
right
think the
next,
place was called Rifle Square, if I remember.
exactly, exactly, right next to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the BDR premises was right next to BDR being Border Guard Bangladesh premises was right next to um, the Rifle Square, as you said, uh, and which is where it actually gets its name, Bangladesh Rifles. That was the abbreviation BDR. That's why Rifle Square again was the shopping mall next to it. But so that was the a very open show of force at the beginning of a regime. Now, I don't know what the politically acute, what the intellectuals and what the people who had accurate political opinions of the time were saying, right? But as a general population, I can tell you to the large part in our conversations, in daily goings around, in when you see our seniors at work talking about it, it was largely swept under the rug because this level of violence didn't touch the normal people, and because people were starting to see some decent changes with the Awami League government present, uh, this was sort of declared a non-issue. It wasn't considered at the time, or the people of Bangladesh didn't hold it up at the time as a human rights violation.
And this happened during the Awami League government,
This happened during the beginning of the Awami League government. Yes,
beginning of the Awami League. Okay.
08, 09, I think is the time period. I'm not, again, not an expert,
No,
not
that's
exactly.
fine. But essentially, this happened after there was a caretaker government for 2 years. I think from 7 to 9 there was a caretaker government, after which Awami League came to power,
And
and after that, I think this.
they also abolished that caretaker government the minute they came into power. And the ability to install a caretaker government was abolished at the time.
So this military coup at the BDR cantonment had happened in the initial phase of Awami League coming back to power.
Exactly.
So but then you what you're saying is that that kind of, like, people forgot, or people didn't hold it up, because there were a lot of changes happening on ground in the with the economy and education or other sectors, and that's how things moved on.
Indeed. The thing where bringing this up is relevant to the situations, or will eventually link up to the situations of today, is this is the moment where Hasina actually took control of the defense forces of Bangladesh and installed her own people in positions of power, from generals to chiefs of units. Everyone who was installed at the time, everyone who was loyal to Hasina was installed in the military at the time, and thus giving her a large control over the peacekeeping forces of the country. Unprecedented control that I think no other prime minister before this um, had over the armed forces. Perhaps you can argue that Irshad at the time had a decent sway being from the armed forces himself, but this was an unprecedented level of control between a prime minister and her armed forces. And eventually, through the years of the Awami League regime, the same process happened to the police, where high ranking police officers were taken away, disappeared, or retired, forced into retirement, and pro Hasina recruits and individuals were given rapid promotions into these positions of power, despite interdepartment or despite intergovernment policies within these departments. This started happening.
In fact, just to add to that, I mean, I think a year or two ago, Al Jazeera had made a documentary called "The Prime Minister's Men," which was actually about the former general of Bangladeshi government, and how his, and how his family has been involved in a lot of crimes. So yeah, move on. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah. So that, I think that was the beginning of the Awami League regime. Now, I think coming in the 2010-11 period was a relatively peaceful period. You know, there was economic growth going on. Um, I'm unsure if the heavy censorship of media had begun then, um, but already there was some people, certain topics. I think you remember while we were there, we were not allowed to
I
touch.
clearly remember as soon as I joined the Independent, one thing that I noticed, which was peculiar, which was new to me, was a ban on internet. There was something that had happened. Some kind, I think there was some issue with some cartoon that had come or something like that around 2010. And for 3 days there was ban on internet. And for the first time, I actually heard about the VPN or something like that. Like, how you how you use proxy IP, and just to bypass it to access, because actually there was actually more than internet. There was actually, I think there was ban on Facebook and something like that. So first time I saw that incident actually.
Right. Yeah. I think that is it's where the censorship started. The BNP Jamaat government may have had a lot of faults, but um, you know what? I remember being younger and opening the paper, and there would be political caricatures of
Yeah,
Khalida Zia, of Tariq Zia, of other members of government, and there were some famous artists, who were really popular among all the papers for making these caricatures. The Awami League government definitely at that time cracked down on media personnel. They cracked down on artists making caricatures. I think the incident you're referring to, I don't remember the artist's name, but he was arrested and prosecuted for making these caricatures of government officials of the Awami League government. And so from the start of it, you could see that kind of shape of small parts of the dictatorial toolkit being employed. Um, Banning of internet, the covering of information. Again, I don't think it was ever done to the point where it severely impacted the people. And when I say by the people, you have to understand Bangladesh, the overwhelming majority of population is lower middle class or lower class population who are living on day-to-day wages or agricultural income or things like that. Um, of course, there's the side of Dhaka. We all interacted with the elite who are, living in their fancy houses and fancy apartments. Um, and somewhere in the middle, there's the middle class families like us. But from the middle class upward, what we noticed was that there's the last couple of generations, especially since Awami League took power, the narrative has always been don't get involved. From our own homes, from our own families, from our own people, the narrative has always been don't get involved. Don't if something is happening, don't speak out. And so, from a very early point in the Awami League regime, that began becoming instilled into the population that if somebody has power and connections, you cannot speak out against them. If something is happening that is unjust, turn a blind eye. Um, and there are many cases of this during the time of the Awami League government. Uh, Slowly and steadily, they crippled the opposition political parties. Now, I'm not a supporter of any particular political party in Bangladesh. I'm a firm believer of there needs to be another option if people like me want to vote.
and
Um,
also I think for the good of the country, it's always good that one should not support one particular political party. I mean, it's like, first of all, in a democracy, the idea is that you should first elect a good candidate. A good candidate should be elected, and then whoever gets the majority should form the government. So, but then over the period in the subcontinent, things are changing. The we are actually kind of moving towards a presidential kind of a election. But anyway, so yeah, so coming to how they were banning the
right. So,
opposition.
actually, just to make a quick expansion on your point of worthy candidates or a good candidate, really, just really quickly. I have a personal opinion, and again, I don't think you can share it as a purely political opinion with backing and fact and insight. But in my opinion, both Sheikh Hasina and Khaleda Zia, in most other countries, Western countries, Europe, other democratic countries, would have been unfit to rule. Sheikh Hasina, based on psychological issues of your family having been killed by this country's army, and Khaleda Zia, based on not passing further than the fourth or fifth grade education level. Um, Neither of these two women, in my opinion, would have been eligible candidates in terms of if the rules of eligibility for a candidate of a political party had to be followed, even if the rules of Bangladesh had to be followed constitutionally, they were non-eligible candidates. Um, However, returning to our narrative, throughout those years, especially since he left Bangladesh, the crippling of the other political parties began. The goal of the
Yes,
Awami League was that none of these parties would ever become a strong contestant in election against Awami League.
yes,
This was done, uh, again, taking pages out of the dictatorial toolbook, raids at night, people disappearing, no official prison records of certain leaders disappearing, um, case after case after case filed against BNP ministers, Jamaat ministers. I'm not saying these are the greatest of people. Politicians, they're always gray. There's no black and white really with politicians. They may have been criminals in certain senses, but 15, 20, 30, 50 cases against one person is not really a possibility, you know? Um, and then no fair judicial process of these cases was ever handled. These people were simply arrested, taken away. So began over the years, this set a trend and a precedent of Awami League's enemies. And I'm not just talking about political enemies, but writers, activists, outspoken individuals being arrested, being taken away in the middle of the night. As a matter of fact, there are convicts who people had assumed dead who are coming out now after 9 years in an undisclosed prison facility that we did not know existed. Um, so this kind of human rights violation began. At the same time, the Awami League government um, began making a lot of deals and investments for the expansion of certain things in Bangladesh. Whether these investments were from China, from India, um, from any kind of other state, there were plenty of ventures going on where Bangladesh was reaching out and collaborating for development of power plants, for development of, again, like you say, bridges, metro rails, things like that. Um, there was also a forced IT boom. I think you remember hearing about the start of the Digital Bangladesh
digital
initiative.
Bangladesh. So in 2010, when I joined Independence, so there was this new narrative, and we were all trying to do article, but honestly, we were a little clueless. What does digital Bangladesh mean? Because, like, and we were, I used to ask my team members to write article on digital Bangladesh, but the problem was we were not clear what is the vision of digital Bangladesh. And also, just to go back on the, like, these arrest of political opponents. So for the first, like, when I reached Bangladesh, I heard about this police battalion called RAB, and like it was like a craze among everybody. I used to also wonder because they used to move around in these black color suits, wearing sunglasses, black sunglasses, and like, everybody used to tell me that RAB is like, it used to send shivers down people's spine if RAB has to come and pick you up. I mean, that was, but then later there was a lot of news about how it became notorious and, like, unpopular for extrajudicial killings and things like that.
100%. And RAB was, initially in its inception, supposed to be a equivalent of a SWAT unit, a rapid action SWAT unit with all the tools and equipment to take in uh, to do these kind of responses. However, RAB became kind of the plaything of the government, and there became this line of RAB officers. The reward for doing what the what the government was saying and carrying out these hit missions and crossfire missions, as we used to call them in Bangladesh, because we used to get these news: XYZ died in crossfire. Um, the reward for this, for these RAB officers, were they were transferred into the army and sent on United Nations peacekeeping missions. This is something the United Nations has in this year started investigating and has laid claims against Bangladesh for taking these killing
Yes.
officers.
And then there's Al Just, and some news agencies have actually done report on this, like that UN has a policy of not involving army, which has been maligned for human rights abuse, or charged for human rights abuse or extrajudicial killings. And on that, international news agencies have done programs on that.
Right. And like we it got to the point where a lot of this was in the public eye. Like our current chief advisor, Dr. Professor Mohammed Yunus,
Professor Mohammad Yunus.
was harassed, beaten, jailed, um, and driven to a state of like malnutrition by this government. This is a man who has, been called and acclaimed internationally, a man who has been given awards and given out awards to some of the most important people in the world. This is a man who is respected everywhere else, but in our own country, the Awami League government was so intent on beating down any potential opposition, any potential avenue for the people to have a voice against them, that this was the kind of movement they were going towards. In the
So
meantime,
yeah, so basically now, I mean, we understand how things gradually started worsening, like in regards to freedom of speech and human rights abuse and extrajudicial killings, and it's all there in the news. So now I would like to understand exactly, like in last, like especially after this last election, which was kind of farce because there were no opponents, and she, and even the international bodies also called out that this is a farce. But exactly, if you could, talk about how in the last year or two things escalated and this kind of reached this point where people were able to overthrow the government, one, and also because you mentioned that the military and the police had people, high ranking people instated by her, uh, who were actually close to her. So it was quite difficult for even personally for me uh, to believe that actually the military had decided, they, it's enough is enough, and they had to, like ask her to get out, if I can say in simple words. So if you could just talk about these things.
okay, so coming to this election, of course, it's not like the last few elections under the Awami League regime have really been fair at all. They haven't. But coming to this last election, yes, it was firstly entirely boycotted. No other opposition stood against her. I think a lot of since this election, before and especially after it, a lot of things happened in terms of people being exposed within the Awami League government, corruption being exposed within the Awami League government. The reason I mentioned a little while ago the whole digital Bangladesh umbrella, just one of the people you mentioned, Salman F Rahman, the Beximco group was, our one-time employer. Um, so Salman F Rahman, um, Pollock, the Minister for IT, and the head of BASIS, Bangladesh Association for Software Information Services. These were the three spearheads, really, eventually behind the whole digital Bangladesh thing. And at this time, using this and other initiatives that Salman Rahman was connected to, thousands of crores of taka was being laundered out of the country into people's offshore accounts, into their pockets. It got so bad. The recent the recent people who've been exposed, even the prime minister's peon, peon means an assistant. Even the prime minister's assistant, the person who fetches her coffee,
And
essentially
files.
had 400 crores in their bank account.
Oh
You
my
know,
god. And it's like he's in the corridors of power, the peons are, seen as very powerful people.
right? And with Salman F Rahman, again, the tale is of thousands of crores. With the Benazir, the chief of police, the tale is with thousands of crores, and these were coming out. Uh, these were coming out in this time of social media. When somebody on a government salary, their son is posting, "Hey, I've purchased a $40,000 cow." Like,
Oh my God.
things happen, investigations happen, and a lot of their farce was crumbling. Of, hey, we've expanded Bangladesh and we've built Bangladesh. From every project, from the Padda Bridge to the metro rail, you can be sure that thousands of crores have lined the pockets of all those from top to bottom involved. Um, Now, this was starting to affect the public with the taka falling, um, and with Bangladesh still being, Sarwar, for the last few years, we had some lax remittance laws. So bringing money into the country was good for us. People like me who were working, earning from abroad, when our money came in, we'd get a 2.5% bump from the government on that. Recently, with all of this coming out, the government cracked down on that and dropped the 2.5% on remittance coming from internationals. They, I think, tried in a lot of ways to kind of control this financial situation that was being exposed. Um, but there was no way to control that narrative. I think with social media and a slightly vocal generation of people pointing out all of this, I have seen personally on my Facebook and interaction during this time, let me point out that the wife of a policeman trying to defend her husband, and the first comment underneath her status, and this was on my own Facebook with people I know personally, the first comment underneath her status was, "How do you afford 6 houses, 3 trips to Europe every year, and 7 cars on a policeman's salary?"
Oh my God.
Right? So this is this became the state of the government.
So you mean to
Um,
say that there was, in simple words, you mean to say that there was blatant corruption happening,
Blatant corruption, yes. Now, since
blatant
the
money laundering happening?
there was also suppression of protests. Now, note, the Awami League government they have always suppressed protests. They've not really allowed the people a vocal outlet. Um, However, there was, since 2018 to 20, between 2018 to 20, or between 2016 to 20, let me say, just to be safe, there were multiple protests. One for road safety, when a student was killed by a bus on the road and the bus didn't stop. And the students protested together and demanded for road safety. Even those protests were violently suppressed, not maybe as violently as today. And then, secondly, again, the origins of the quota reform movement um, around 2018, where you know um, those students began originally protesting to the point where, despite some suppression of the protest, the government had to issue a statement in accordance with the students in 2018, saying, "Okay, we will abolish this quota." Um, this Speaking of on quotas a little bit, right? So Bangladesh had a 30% freedom fighter quota,
Yeah,
which was instituted after freedom and given to those who had fought in the war. This
correct.
uh, this quota made up a part of the total quota system, with some other quotas going for disabled, for third gender individuals, for minorities, and other things. However, it's this freedom fighter quota that was the most abused by the government throughout, because it was passed down from generation to generation. So from father to son, father who fought in the war to his 2 or 3 sons, and from these 2 or 3 sons or daughters, let's say, passed down again to their 2 or 3 children, each of them. Um, so from that very small number of 2.5% of freedom fighters among the population, you're rapidly expanding this, number one, um, making it something hereditary that can be passed down to people who are now 3 generations removed from those who fought in the war.
And they all had allegiance to the Awami League government.
So I can't blanket, like, say every freedom fighter and their family was had allegiance to the Awami League government. However, I can say this: the Awami League government used this quota to distribute fake certificates of freedom fighters to their favored individuals, um, and then instill them in positions within government jobs. the 99% of the government jobs, even if you're saying 30% is on quota, 99% of them were not assigned on merit. They were assigned on nepotism, connection to the Awami League government, and by misuse of this quota system, right? Um, so this became a very big thing, um, where qualified people who have the merit to be in these positions are not passing from their BCS exams, are not being accepted into the government cadre, and are not being even those who actually got through on merit are not being considered for promotions and everything else, because even promotions, you could use a quota and be eligible for a promotion. Um, so 2018 really was a boiling point for that, with students, coming in and saying no more. They do not want this. It's been too far removed. And despite all the respect for those who fought in the war, it's not benefiting them in any way anymore. So 2018, the High Court issued a ruling that supported this statement of the students that the quota system is being abolished, and that from now on there would be no more freedom fighter quota. And there would be some adjustment of the other quotas. I'm not sure of the number. This is something you can look up. However, whether this was done in practice between 2018 and 2024, we're not entirely sure. We do know nepotism and Sheikh Hasina's heavy hand played an instrumental role in people being in positions of power, not just positions of power, even low-level government positions at this stage. So for the students, this was a big win. This was seen as a big victory, that, hey, in all these years of Awami League regime, in what was it then, like 10 years of Awami League regime, as it was in 2018, they finally managed to actually make the government change a decision.
So now I'll move to the last point of discussion, because you have nicely summarized all the things that broadly led to this toppling of the government. One thing, if you notice, in the with the history of Bangladesh, uh, quite similar to Pakistan, uh, there has there's been a lot of military coups and toppling of the government, and has very less incident of smooth transfer of power. And I know that this current student lot, including you and many people like you, they are looking for a new beginning, a new alternative, a new Bangladesh. That's the that's the narrative you all are looking for. A country which is which is free and fair, to put it in simple words, where there is development, and not development at the cost of just one political force, or just a few group of people, where everybody should have the freedom, everybody should have the share of say and contribution. So so just tell me about the hopes that you have with the current lot, and especially the student wing, the students, basically they don't actually have a uni they don't have the they don't have a in the sense, an entity, a kind of a concrete entity. It's not a political force, it's not a registered body or a outfit. For example, Chhatro League was a kind of a registered student wing of Awami League, but all these students now who are, I think, these three students who are part of the caretaker government, if I'm not wrong,
Two of them, Asif and Nahid. Yeah,
Nahid
two.
Nahid Islam, right?
Yeah, and Asif
So
Mahmood. Yeah.
yeah, so these people actually don't represent any organization. They just
No.
are identified as Bangladeshi students. So what is the hope, faith, and you think should be the way ahead?
So before I answer that, let me just digress for 1 second to explain the hopes and faith. I'm not going to go really into this revolution and anything else. There's a lot of news and a lot of other sources you can see and find now that are coming out that explain the whole thing. As a matter of fact, and I'll send you this video later, there's an amazing Indian YouTuber who just does a bang up job.
Yeah,
Uh,
Abhishek Banerjee.
yeah, this does a bang up job of a lot of the situations in Bangladesh,
Yeah,
and I
he has
really,
made three parts of the whole Bangladeshi conflict,
exactly. And I
and
really think that,
he has summed up everything very nicely.
so I don't think I need to get into that, but let me get into a bit of the trauma for a second. This is a generation that raised its voice and saw people being killed indiscriminately around them and have some of the PTSD markers of people coming out of a war. While the revolution was very much a student movement, let's also understand that from within the students, you have a vast difference in people from different classes, different cultures, different backgrounds, different religious viewpoints, um, who are not all unified. After the revolution ended, we were all part of the victory parade and going out, and there was this joy in everyone's hearts. That very quickly did turn into, in the end of every revolution, there's some amount of looting. And, they saw it in Sri Lanka. They saw it with Najib's house in Malaysia, with plenty of things happening like that. The Bangladeshi people kind of acted out. Um, and there was some more influence from outside political parties that created some unrest after that. My hope is very linked to the way the students responded to this. They're not a coordinated entity yet. And also, I don't think the two students who are now in the caretaker government, Asif and Nahid, can ever actually join an actual political party, having been part of the caretaker government, right? However, the students have now organized. Each neighborhood has a organizer who is working with larger scale organizers on the district level, who are then communicating with the students who are on advisory bodies and working with government institutes. So a large structure has now come into place as to how they communicate. And you know what? They set this structure in place while controlling traffic, while patrolling their areas, because the police had stood down entirely. The police had stood down entirely. So the hope for us, really, for people like me, I do know there are people here who still hope BNP or some other party come into power. The hope for us now is for eventually for the formation, one, of a party which does now stand with the voice of this movement, not a party that has come and allied themselves with the movement near the end of it, that utilizes this network that has been set up. And for, like you said, a democratic and free Bangladesh, of course, a lot of the hope for our future is to pass large-scale legislation changes to overturn a lot of the corrupt lawmaking that has been done in the last 15 years, to put checks and balances in place so that corruption in government can never be so rampant, ever again. Now, how much a country can achieve that, Sarwar, you and I can debate about that, I think, for 2 days and will not come to an end. But let me tell you a small anecdote about how Bangladesh is changing, right? Just yesterday, I was on the street buying some food when I saw a man being beaten on the street by some goons, right? There was a time, Sarwar, when I or the other people of the neighborhood would have walked away from that situation and said, I kept my head down and said, I don't know. Yesterday, I alone, as a person, could walk up there and say, are you guys serious? Is this the Bangladesh that came after the change? Do you want 100 students to be here right now? You're beating someone for putting a cycle on the footpath. Instantly, it stopped. And so now the people and the masses are being aware. The people who used to come take bribes from store owners, the syndicates that used to come take protection, racketeering money, basically, from shops and small vegetable sellers and stuff, these people are being caught and prosecuted. All in all, I think, Sarwar, it's time for a Bangladesh where there's slightly less corruption, no suppression of freedom of speech, and I don't think a government can come in and do it again. People have realized and are vocally, talking about everything they want. Uh, Certain amounts, of fair legislation, safety, of course, for minorities and everyone else. You can see the student population.
So I'll come to that also. So, but tell me one thing: do you see? I mean, from going by ground report, do you see any new political party being formed by these student leaders?
Not yet. And I do believe most people believe, not just me, the caretaker government should be in power a year or two, a minimum amount of time for these political parties to come into place. As far as I understand, from my limited understanding, that the registration of a political party is not a very difficult thing. It might have been prevented in the past by Awami League and others, but it's not a very difficult thing. And I think the harder part will be to field candidates who are non-corrupt but are recognizable enough to gain the rural vote, the vote from the outlying cities, outlying villages, of these people who are not as social media savvy and as tuned in to the student generation and as tuned in to the new narrative of a vocal Bangladesh. There are still plenty of people on the root level who have grown up. My father supported BNP, his father supported BNP, and his father supported BNP. So now that BNP has a chance, I will vote BNP. The thing we wish is maybe for a change in these narratives, for a and I think for the first time in Bangladesh history, a political party will be able to campaign in these rural areas and offer changes and gain support. You know,
So what you're saying is that at the moment the vision is to have this government, the caretaker government, for the next year or two. That's what the people aspire for, and there has been no open statement about the period of this government. And perhaps what you feel is that by the end of it, you are sure that the people who brought about the change in the revolution will be able to form a government. I mean, sorry, will be able to form a political party, which should not be a very big thing, and perhaps be part of be part of be part of the new government in the times to come. Uh, so, lastly, my question is that there's been a lot of reports about attack on the minority. So, what is your say on that?
so I can say both from personal involvement and from reports as well. Now, what one rumor we hear is that one of the final orders of Hasina to Chhatra League as she departed, there were more than her student wing, there were her thugs and her enforcers. So the final order was to cause chaos, to spread the narrative that Bangladesh has destabilized itself without Hasina, to put pressure on minorities, to show that there may be some minority migration from Bangladesh to other countries outward, um, for Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, and others. However, the lovely thing is the community came together to make sure this narrative, despite this narrative still being spread by the remnants of Chhatra League, to make sure this narrative hasn't
No,
happened.
but recently there was a report which I saw yesterday. Uh, People from the minority protesting on the streets of Bangladesh.
Yes. So minority people were protesting. The protest, I think, right now has stopped. I think the general feeling of if you are, let's say, a minority person living in the house, normal person, you're not politically affiliated, you have not been screaming about political change. It's not to you to know, is this a BNP person? Is it a Jamaat extremist? Or is it a normal person of Bangladesh who's coming to attack me? You will feel the fear of being attacked. However, the communities did come together. I know every mandir, every Hindu area now has multiple guards from Muslim
And
madrasa students, from
okay, and also I
English.
think the residents are have formed the vigilante groups.
Residents have formed groups to guard them. Students are using drones to protect these areas. And I'll tell you something. We started this initiative the day after the revolution. I launched it with this Bangladeshi researcher, Shamail Ahmed. We launched this thing called BD Fund Bank, which was just a registry of fundraising initiatives. Two or three of the initiatives in this fund bank we've set up are dealing with the protection and rebuilding of Hindu minority community houses that have been attacked, dealing with financial aid and protection for these families, for minority families, and all of that. And we've, mashallah, managed to raise in 3 days, over 20 to 30 lakhs for
Oh
causes
my
like
God, that's great.
that. Is the new wave of Bangladesh. That's, it got this site got featured in the Daily Star. I'll send you the article, but this is the new wave of Bangladesh, and I think everyone can come together. I think people in minorities were feeling unsafe, and I think a big part of them came together with the population, the general population, and there's a new vibe in Bangladesh. If you walk down my street now, I see artwork of people kissing. I see artwork of, Hindu religious icons. I see artwork of Hindu and Muslim and Buddhist people together, and these artwork are being put up by the students. I will say this. From the last generation to mine, like millennials to Gen Z, they are highly tolerant of all of this. The whole racial classist element that may have permeated Bangladesh 20, 30 years ago has been dying down now. And the general population of Bangladesh it's not even openly pro-Muslim anymore. Let's be clear.
Okay. And finally, so what you're saying is that the students who brought about this change, so now they are working in a coordinated manner.
They are, yes.
Okay. So thanks a lot, Abrar, for the time and great insight into the situation. It's actually a pleasure talking to you and understanding the situation that happened over the decade, over more than a decade since I left. So thanks a lot, Abrar.
No worries. One thing to add, I just came to mind, sorry, just as we close off the discourse, the caretaker government has now been issuing arrest warrants and law enforcement action against people harassing minorities. So
Okay.
this is now on an official level now. And the two student coordinators in the government have spoken out, both Nahid and Asif, against condemning this and openly saying that the criminals behind this will be brought to justice. So, thank you also for giving me the time to
No,
talk about this.
it's my
It was
pleasure.
it was a great opportunity, to speak with you after so long as well. I follow a lot of your food blogging work, uh, all of the delicious dishes and places you visit. Your food and travel stuff I've been following for a while now. So
Thank
it
you.
was good to reconnect, um, and hopefully we can have another personal reconnection session as well sometime soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Abrar. Take care.
Take
Bye.
care, Sarpan. Thank you. Bye bye.